Hello, everyone. My name is Damien. I'm a scientist here at the Australian Wine Research Institute. And I thought we would complement Anthony and Laura's presentation about this exciting citizen science project that you can take part in with a little bit of a better understanding of the science behind food flavor and all the beverages and foods that we eat every day. There's a lot of science there, and there's a lot of different career paths and interesting, cool things that are going on behind the scenes that we don't really think about when we consume foods. So hopefully we'll touch on some of those things in this presentation. So flavor. So what is flavor? We experience it every time we eat a food or drink something, but we generally don't stop and think, well, what is actually signaling flavor, or what's arising when we experience the flavor of the food, and how do we distinguish or recognize certain flavors from others and decide which ones are our favorite foods? And where does food flavor come from? So one of the important things that we do here is we use a lot of different microbes to create different flavors in beverages. But microbes and yeast are used in all kinds of different foods, even some foods that you'd be very surprised, such as chocolate. So what is flavor? So let's start to understand what flavor, because it's really common for people to refer to flavor by just saying taste, but that's not really true. Although people say, oh, that tastes delicious, like these pastries, or oh, that tastes disgusting, like a lot of people react to green vegetables like that. That's not actually entirely true. And that taste is just one component of the actual flavor that we're experiencing when we eat these things. So let's untangle what flavor actually is and also where it occurs, because it seems like flavor is actually in the product that we're eating. Let's say in these jelly beans, for instance. But flavor itself is actually a construct in your brain. So it has a lot to do with how you experience the world through your senses. But your brain puts that together into one big kind of perception or sensation, which is the flavor of food. And then you remember that. So you can decide which ones you like and which ones you don't. So taste is just one part of the flavor of food. And we have many different tastes that we can kind of sense. You can think of sweetness, saltiness, bitterness, sourness, and a word called umami, which you may not be as familiar with, but it's big in Japan, where they tend to use this word and it translates roughly to deliciousness. And we would say maybe savoriness here. So something like a chicken broth could be described as umami. But those are just, 5 basic tastes. And there are a lot more than 5 different flavors that we can experience in the day in the foods that we eat. So where is flavor? What are the other senses that are involved in flavor rather than just taste? So actually it starts out with our sense of sight or vision. So we can actually, might hear the expression of people eating with their eyes. And this is quite true. You can think of how you might take a jelly bean and it's orange and you might think, oh, well, that's probably orange flavored, or a red one might be cherry flavored. So this is kind of a way that your mind starts to prime itself. And as you eat more of those foods, those kind of interactions or that is really reflected in your memories of certain types of foods. Surprisingly, even the sound of a food can influence its flavor. And you're like, how is that possible? But actually really good example that we get all the time is actually the packaging around potato chips. So if you think about it, chips are pretty crunchy, right? A really good potato chip is have a nice crunch to it. And that's why a lot of food companies will take really crunchy sounding packaging. So when you grab that bag of chips, you're getting primed by the sound of that bag, which is going to help you reinforce the crunchiness of the potato chips. But those are a little bit exterior to the actual flavor of foods, although they can modify the flavor and help us remember the flavors of our favorite foods. So generally we think of flavor as the combination of our sense of smell, so signaled by the receptors in our nose, and the molecules from our food will go into the nose, and then we recognize them as a smell. Or when you're chewing a food, it'll come back up through the back of your throat while you're breathing out. And again, it'll send the signal of the smell of that food. But also we have our taste and touch. So touch with the food being in the mouth or the liquid or beverage that you're drinking, and also the different tastes. And all of those things come together in the brain. The brain puts it all together into one little package that we call flavor. And that's how we recognize a lot of the different foods that we eat. But smell plays a huge and important role in all of this. But don't take my word for it. Like a good scientist, you have to kind of prove it to yourself. So you go back to the jelly beans, and if you want to pause the video and maybe grab a candy or some jelly beans or something with a strong sense of smell, It's really easy to prove this to yourself by the jelly bean experiment, where you plug your nose so you can't smell because there's blocks, so nothing's going to come back up through the throat when you're chewing the food. So if you plug your nose and put the jelly bean in your mouth and you chew, if you really pay attention, it just tastes sweet and sort of chewy. But when you unplug your nose, you get a big rush of flavor. And that's really what we're talking about. And that's how you can discern the different types of aromas that are in all the different jelly beans. You can even try it with closing your eyes and seeing if you can get better and better at deciding which flavor is actually there rather than using the priming of the different colors of the jelly beans. So where does flavor come from? So flavor itself, it comes from all the different molecules in the foods and drinks, and some of these different compounds, they can excite different senses and other ones excite multiple senses. But I'll use coffee as an example because coffee is a very, very popular beverage, and it goes through all kinds of different processing before it gets to be consumed. And each step in the processing actually contributes to its overall flavor. So surprisingly, it looks like coffee beans. We think of the smell of roasted coffee beans. Probably everyone's parents enjoy coffee. But coffee actually starts out as a cherry. So it's like a cherry on a tree. And the coffee bean itself is actually the cherry pit. And those cherries are harvested, so they have a lot of sugar around them, and the pit inside, which will be the coffee bean later on. And then they're actually put into a fermentation with yeast and bacteria. And the yeast and the bacteria eat some of the sugar and break down the little cherry. And then we take out the pit of the cherry, they get dried and roasted. And that's what brews coffee in the end. And you can add milk and things like that as well. So the raw ingredients, the fermentation, and the processing all can contribute to the different aspects of a food product, especially complex fermented foods like coffee or chocolate or wine. So if we use coffee as an example, from the raw ingredients, you might get sweetness from the milk, actually, that you put in your coffee. There's a lot of different kinds of milk sugars in milk. Bitterness from the caffeine that's in coffee, which is also a stimulant and probably why everybody drinks it every morning to wake up. But there's also the other aspects of the flavor of coffee, like touch sensation. So the temperature of the coffee, you can think if it's too high, it might burn your mouth and not be very pleasant. If there's too many coffee beans and not enough water, it might taste really, really astringent or bitter, as well as we have pain receptors in our mouth. And you might think, well, that's a bit weird. We don't have pain when we're eating food. But if you think about it, you do. We'll think about hot sauces, right? And those are the same kind of pain receptors that are on the outside of your body. They actually occur in the mouth. And so things like hot sauce or chili peppers, they can excite kind of pain sensations. But those are just a few different components or sensations. Smell can play a huge role. And there's many, many different types of coffees out there in the world, produced all over the world. And we get all kinds of a vast number of different smells that help us distinguish coffees from, let's say, Africa, or coffee from Brazil, or even from Australia. And it's quite interesting because there's only maybe 6 common basic tastes, 5 or 6, depending on who you ask, as well as a few mouthfeel sensations and temperature and pain. But recently, some researchers in the United States, they discovered that humans could actually detect over 1 trillion different types of odors. So those are aromas or smells. And so 1 trillion types of odors combined with all the different combinations of tastes and touch sensations is what actually contributes to the food that we eat and experience. So we're actually much better than dogs. Although we think that dogs have a great sense of smell, humans can detect many, many, many more odorants. And we explore all kinds of different types of foods, whereas dogs are generally only good at smelling things that are close to the ground. So smell plays a huge role in the foods that we eat. And the most complex aromas and the most complex foods that we have are pretty much all fermented. And so the microbes transform some of these raw ingredients through fermentation or bacterial conversions into the products that we really enjoy today. And a great example that you encounter every day is bread, right? So bread is the flour is fermented, and the bubbles in bread is actually the trapped CO2 from the fermentation of sugars, and the ethanol is burnt off in the oven when you bake your bread. As well as we have beverages like kombucha, which maybe some of you know. It's kind of like a not very sweet, fizzy tea that goes under both a bacterial and a yeast fermentation. And here we have a picture of a cacao pod. So it kind of looks like a corn on the cob, but it's actually cacao. And the little kind of pods inside of that sort of fruit looking thing are fermented and crushed up into a paste. And that's actually the basis or the raw material for creating chocolate, one of our favorite foods, right? So it's not just becoming a chef. Like if you really like foods and you're interested in the flavor of foods and beverages, you don't have to just take a culinary career. There's actually many STEM career pathways in food. And it might include things like microbiology and genetics, identify new types of microbes to help us produce new and interesting foods, as well as produce maybe crops that are tolerant to climate change or all those other things. We also have a huge array of flavor chemists that work here at the AWRI, or the Australian Wine Research Institute, and they study all kinds of things about wine flavor. You can also study nutrition and dietetics, which is how basically we react to our foods and how it impacts our health. Food science and engineering is a huge field to create all the different textures and make food production more efficient for the world. Sensory and consumer science is what I do. So I test people's response to the different types of foods and prototypes of foods that we have, as well as even psychologists and neuroscientists study food flavor. So that's just a small list of many, many more of STEM careers that you can actually pursue as you're going further. If you're interested in food and beverage, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry around the world. There's all kinds of interesting companies producing all kinds of amazing different foods and beverages and raw materials that make up our diet. So thank you very much for the presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and please reach out to us if you have any questions or want to know more or would like any advice on career pathways if you're interested in food and beverage flavors. Thank you.